So what specifically is a for loop? We have an example here of a for loop, a common for loop. Normally you're using your I or your j variables when you're doing for loops. We're talking about integers. You can use any data type that you want depending on how big you need your loop to be, what range you need your loop to be. If you only need to loop through 20 values, then by all means use less memory, of course. If you have a very big program, it can come in handy because you want to manage your memory properly. But the common thing is to use for loops with integers because they're handy. Things work the way you want them to. And also gives rise to working with casting if you work with integers in your for loops and then you want to cast to something else so that you can use it within a method call or something like that. Well, anyway, and that also implies that you could work with the implicit conversion as we talked about already. Now, when we do specify this for loop, we're going to execute this line of code over and over and over again for the specified number of times that this condition will allow. Now, you can have as many statements here as you want to. You don't have to limit it to one statement, two statements. It could be as big as you want it to. Sometimes it can get pretty big. Now, you do want to have your for loops to be very organized, that you could actually call method calls within your for loops as well. So you don't want to stuff all your code right in here, and then that's going to cause some problems for you because you have a lot of code in a for loop, and then when you want to do it again later on, you have to put all that code in that for loop again. So common thing is to create a function that's going to do the work for you and create it from a class, and then you can put that in your for loop, and then you can do processing based on that. So that's one way to do that. Of course, you have to make this work within the framework of what you're trying to do. Also note that any variables that you create in here, that you declare and create, like int, for example, this is controlling the loop. This is not visible outside of this loop. It's only visible for this loop. And it's testing the conditions of the loop on the same line. Where this can work, it is actually working very similar to the if statement, because you're basically performing a condition. The condition is to make sure that this I is going to start from 0 and maintain itself under 1,000. If it becomes 1,000, then it's going to drop off. So it's very similar to working with while loops, for each, and if statements, if else statements, and even switch. It has the same kind of thing. It's a control statement. So that's how it works. So if we have another integer declared here, for example, and then we process this, we process this 1,000 times. And each time we process that, I'll show you that again. I just wanted to show you that it does work. We'll rebuild this. We'll take a peek at what this. I think we're not using it. Yes, we're never using this. So anyway, this variable is going to be declared and assigned. And it's declared and assigned 1,000 times. So each time that it comes through, it's getting declared again. So it's going over and over again. It's dropping off each time this loop passes by because it doesn't remember itself really, because we're declaring it to do so. You could not initialize something. But I'll just show you the example here. You could not initialize something, and then you can keep those values in there. So we're incrementing it. We just want to put a control in here, write line. We'll write line k instead of I to show you that. You see, it never goes past 3 because it's always initialized as 2 when it comes through each time. And there's no error there. It's not like we're reinitializing something. You can't do that. Well, it's not having a problem with that. And what we can do is we can just stick this outside, and you'll see a different process here. And there it's incrementing starting at 2, and then you see we get up to 1,002. So it's adding 1 there, and it's remembering the value beforehand. And it just, you can see we just go up, and that I'm going through the list here. And it's remembering what it was beforehand. So it's common to use this loop to go through, set a value, increment something. You want to count something. You want to count something and use the if condition because you only want to count. You want to go through a list of 1,000 items, an array perhaps, and then you only want to use certain elements of the array. So you would use an if statement, and then you can increment a value or something like that, or do something, or perform a method. All different types of things you can do with for. We're going to see it a lot. This is just to introduce it. So we'll just go over this for the most part again, the beginning of what we're talking about here. The first thing we do is we initialize our variable that's going to control this block of code, and we're going to set it to 0. I is equal to 0. That's what we're going to do. Just a little statement within this. Then we're going to have our condition. I is less than 1,000. So this is going to count as long as I is less than 1,000, we can loop through this. Now we're going to have to do I plus plus, and that's going to add 1 to this. And that's going to just have it go, and when it finally reaches 1,000, it's going to stop because this condition is no longer true. Now if we were to put this as a negative, then we might run into problems because this is going to be always less than 1,000, so it's always going to continue. It's never going to stop. Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever until we run out of the bounds of this variable. That's when things are going to stop because we're going to go past the range. So that's how that works for the most part. We'll see this a lot throughout the training. This is just to introduce it. For loops. Great stuff.